The story kicks off inside a U.S. prison, where an older inmate named Dwight is getting ready for a big day, his release.
Years, I'm gonna see if it married me back.
After spending 25 years behind bars for wiping out a gangster crew, he's finally walking free.
Don't want to pay you.
Back in the day, Dwight was the right-hand man of the most feared mafia boss in the country, Pete. Once he's out, Dwight heads straight to Pete's headquarters since he has nowhere else to go. His wife and daughter cut ties with him long ago, and now he's got nothing left but the criminal world. As he moves through the city, he's amazed at how much has changed. Tall buildings, electric bikes, and a world that feels completely foreign to him.
Gang's all here. There he is.
When Dwight arrives at Pete's place, he's welcomed inside. Pete, now an old man in poor health, doesn't look like the powerful boss he once was. Soon, Pete's son, Charles, steps in and explains that he's the one running things now.
What can they do? Someone comes through the door. Way the fuck over there, Dwight.
Chicky's my underboss. And Vince is one of my capos.
The entire empire has been passed down to him, and he's got a new right-hand man named Vince. That means there's no room for Dwight anymore.
It changes.
25 years into my son. Look. I don't know what you're expecting.
Even though Charles isn't offering Dwight his old position,
I'm expecting some form of adequate compensation.
he still acknowledges the loyalty Dwight showed by keeping his mouth shut for 25 years. As a form of respect, he sends Dwight to Tulsa, a small city where he'll be in charge of collecting taxes from local drug dealers. Basically, he has to build a new operation from scratch.
What the fuck is Tulsa?
It's a city in Oklahoma.
Dwight isn't thrilled about the idea.
But I'd be doing it in Oklahoma.
There's nothing left for you here.
Nothing left for me here. Now all I got to my name is a few bucks.
He spent decades earning his place, and now they expect him to start over? He refuses, which doesn't sit well with Vince, who tries to kick him out. But Dwight isn't one to back down. He knocks Vince out cold in an instant.
There's nothing left for me!
Hey! Well, now you're wearing diapers.
Pete steps in, apologizing for the situation and explaining that things aren't the same as they used to be.
Jesus Christ, I came here with some sense of honor.
He advises Dwight to follow Charles's orders, reminding him that at least he's got a job. With no other option, Dwight gives in and agrees to go to Tulsa. When he gets there, Dwight hails a cab to his new home, striking up a conversation with the driver,
You're not curious?
Not really.
a young guy named Tyson. The two get along well, chatting throughout the ride. Along the way, Dwight notices a coffee shop with a cannabis leaf on its sign and asks Tyson about it.
What is that place?
It's a dispensary. It's where they sell marijuana.
Tyson explains that while it's a regular coffee shop, they also sell marijuana. Intrigued, Dwight tells Tyson to wait outside while he heads in.
Why don't you pull over there? To wait a little bit.
Inside, Dwight asks an employee to fetch the owner, but the guy rudely refuses and kicks him out.
It's okay, I'm just looking around. It's okay. You heard me, Jumbo. Get Bodie.
Dwight, unfazed, steps outside, grabs a thermos from Tyson's cab, and marches back in. He doesn't take no for an answer and causes enough of a scene that the shop's owner, Bod, finally shows up.
Mister, I told you. Oh my God!
Dwight wastes no time getting to the point. He introduces himself as a former top enforcer for Pete's Mafia and tells Bod that all drug dealers in Tulsa, including him, now owe a 20% cut of their earnings.
You don't need to put yourself through this thing. I want to be your friend.
In exchange, Dwight offers protection from other criminals, the FBI, and law enforcement. Realizing he doesn't have much of a choice, Bod reluctantly agrees and pays his dues on the spot.
Need a commission. Capiche?
After securing his first business deal, Dwight hops back into the cab and offers Tyson a full-time gig as his personal driver, promising good pay. Tyson immediately accepts, officially becoming Dwight's right-hand man in Tulsa.
Right for me now. What?
That night, Dwight checks out a local nightclub, making connections with both customers and the owner, Keller. He's scouting for potential recruits, people he can bring into his growing operation. The next
Well, I assume you don't have Keanu. Salud. Salud.
The next day, Dwight and Tyson swing by Bod's shop again. This time, Dwight asks where Bod gets his marijuana supply. Bod tells him about a local grower named Jimmy, who runs a massive weed farm and supplies the entire city. Dwight asks for an introduction. Later, Dwight returns to the nightclub and meets a woman named Anna. They hit it off instantly.
Are you wanted or something?
Nobody wants me.
She's there with friends, and soon enough, Dwight is partying with them. By the end of the night, he invites Anna back to his place, and she happily accepts.
But we'll figure it out.
The next morning, she rushes out, explaining she has work, but Dwight hopes they'll meet again. Meanwhile, over at the FBI's Tulsa office, agents are having a meeting about Dwight. They're well aware that he's been released and have concerns about what he might be up to. Among the agents in the meeting is Anna,
Not really our purview, but a high-ranking mafia capo.
who is stunned to learn that the man she just spent the night with is a notorious ex-con. Curious, she later calls a colleague to dig up more information on Dwight. She learns that he used to be Pete's right-hand man and was feared for his ruthless ways.
Nothing sexier than a cold-blooded killer with principles.
Now even more intrigued, Anna thanks her colleague and hangs up. Back in New York, Charles gets a visit from Vince, who is still fuming about the beating Dwight gave him.
How you feeling?
Fucking mandibles broken, tree place.
His jaw is badly injured, and he demands that Charles do something about it. Understanding that Dwight was once a trusted lieutenant to his father, Charles decides to consult Pete before making a move.
That's friend Vince. You know that. And he's a capo too.
In Tulsa, Dwight and Tyson visit Bod again to collect the weekly cut. Dwight also reminds Bod that he still needs to be introduced to Jimmy. Bod, however, is busy and promises to arrange the meeting later.
Jimmy?
Yeah,
Why?
so I can cut a better deal.
When will all of this start happening?
A couple of hours later, Dwight gets a call from Charles. He demands $50,000 as compensation for Vince's injury. Not wanting to create unnecessary problems, Dwight agrees and tells Charles to take the money out of his earnings.
You embarrassed him. He's in pain.
If you hear it ticking, don't open it.
That evening, Anna unexpectedly shows up at Dwight's apartment. Unaware that she's an FBI agent, Dwight welcomes her inside. During their conversation, Anna casually asks why he's in Tulsa. Dwight plays it cool, claiming he's just there to relax and enjoy retirement.
I'm an exile.
Great.
Maybe it's none of your business.
Not wanting to reveal too much, Anna simply warns him to be careful, saying the city isn't as quiet as it seems. A little later, Bod finally takes Dwight to meet Jimmy. When they arrive, Jimmy greets them warmly, and Dwight immediately proposes a business deal. He offers to distribute Jimmy's entire crop throughout Tulsa while ensuring his safety from any threats.
It's $1,200 a unit for the buds based on a 10-unit order. You drive a hard bargain.
But fair.
Jimmy sees the value in Dwight's offer and agrees to work with him. From that moment on, they officially become partners.
Deal.
The following day, Dwight sits in his apartment, staring at his laptop. For the first time in years, he allows himself to wonder about his past. With a few clicks, he starts searching for any trace of his wife and daughter, the family that left him behind long ago. Not long after, Dwight managed to track down his daughter's address through social media. Along with that, he also got hold of her phone number. Without wasting any time, he dialed her up. As soon as she picked up, Dwight quickly apologized and told her how much he missed her.
It's Dwight Manfredi. It's her father.
Listen, I'm sorry, but she doesn't want to talk to you.
But before he could say much, she recognized his voice and immediately hung up. Standing there in silence, Dwight felt his heart sink. It was clear she didn't want anything to do with him anymore. Meanwhile, over at another part of town, Anna and her FBI team were surrounding the house of a known terrorist.
I'm giving you the opportunity to surrender peacefully.
They were trying to talk him into surrendering, offering to reduce his punishment if he gave himself up. But the terrorist had no intention of going down that easily. Instead of coming out, he triggered an explosion, blowing up the entire house and taking himself with it. Back in the city, Dwight and Tyson were busy collecting their share from Bod's coffee shop. Something fell off to Dwight. The shop was way more crowded than usual.
Cut rate Woodstock?
What's Woodstock?
What's Woodstock?
Curious, he went to the back to find Bod and asked what was going on. Bod explained that they were throwing a party featuring a brand new drug made from nitrous oxide gas. The catch? It was inhaled using balloons, making it less likely to attract law enforcement's attention. Hearing this, Dwight immediately saw an opportunity. He suggested selling the product at an upcoming music festival to rake in some serious cash. To sweeten the deal, he even offered to contribute to the initial investment in exchange for a fair share of the profits. After some thought, Bod agreed, but they both knew they had to strategize before diving in. That same night, Dwight made his way to Keller's nightclub. He pitched the idea to Keller, offering to pay him double if he agreed to join in on the business. The deal was too good to pass up, and Keller accepted without hesitation.
Technically, this is a restaurant, so you can buy nitrous in bulk.
It's a little over $100 grand.
That's right.
The next day, Dwight went to renew his driver's license since his old one had expired. However, during his driving test on the highway, a car suddenly came out of nowhere and attacked him. Reacting instantly, Dwight chased after the vehicle.
Experienced driver, some of these kids...
Even as bullets flew, wounding his driving instructor. Unfortunately, the attacker managed to escape before Dwight could catch up. Shortly after, the police picked up Dwight and brought him in for questioning. Given his history as the right-hand man of Pete, one of the most powerful mafia bosses in America, the cops naturally assumed he was involved in some kind of trouble.
Unprovoked. Just boom, boom, boom.
Like I said 26 times before.
Once your statement's complete, we'll release you.
Release?
Dwight, however, insisted he was just a victim this time. But the police weren't convinced, so they decided to hold him for a couple of hours. It wasn't until Anna showed up that Dwight was finally released. To his surprise, he learned that she was an FBI agent. She told him to stay calm, assuring him she was only there to help.
Over the radio, there was a shooting. They mentioned your name.
What the fuck's going on? Why is the ATF button in?
Once he was out, Dwight felt grateful and invited her to dinner. Over the meal, he shared bits of his past, admitting his ties to Pete and his time in prison. Anna, however, simply smiled. She already knew everything. Later that night, Dwight invited her back to his apartment, and they spent an intimate evening together. The next morning, Dwight reached out to Charles to talk about the previous day's attack. He suspected Vince was behind it, looking for revenge. However, Charles shut down that idea immediately, explaining that Vince never left his side. That meant someone else was responsible.
Somebody tried to kill me yesterday. Is this Vince's hand?
Hey, told Vince it's over. It's fucking over.
Determined to find out the truth, Dwight visited the hospital to check on his injured driving instructor. Wasting no time, he slipped the man an envelope full of cash and asked him to track down the license plate of the car that had attacked them. Though still recovering, the instructor agreed, promising to call Dwight once he had something. A while later, the instructor provided Dwight with the car's details. Wasting no time, Dwight and Tyson headed to the given address, only to find the vehicle burned to a crisp. Not willing to give up, Dwight searched inside and found a small torn piece of fabric with a ranch logo from Tulsa.
OG got on them isotoners. I see you.
Type in FR and horses.
That was enough for him to put the pieces together. Whoever had attacked him had ties to that ranch. Without hesitation, Dwight drove to the ranch and decided to wait. Hours passed and finally, the owner returned. Dwight tailed him discreetly, ready to confront him. However, just as he was about to make a move, he noticed the man's child running up to greet him with a hug. Seeing this, Dwight hesitated. Killing a man in front of his kid wasn't his style. He decided to wait until morning. The next day, Dwight caught the ranch owner, Armand, off guard, holding him at gunpoint.
Get on your knees.
He demanded to know why he had been attacked and who had ordered the hit. Armand, realizing he had no way out, admitted that he thought Dwight had come to Tulsa to take him out on Charles's orders.
You gonna tell me that wasn't you who tried to take me out the other?
I saw you at the mall. I figured Chicky's the one who sent you here to kill me.
Dwight, caught off guard, asked why Charles would even want him dead. That's when Armand dropped a bombshell. While Dwight had been in prison, he had worked for Charles and knew a dangerous secret. Charles had orchestrated the setup that led to Dwight's 25-year sentence. Dwight was stunned. The man he had trusted had been the one to betray him.
Prison, they set you up. I tried to warn you, but I couldn't get through.
Despite his anger, he kept his composure. Out of respect for Pete, he decided not to take immediate action against Charles. Instead, he struck a deal with Armand. He would let him live if he agreed to work under him. Left with no other option, Armand agreed. That night, the shipment of the new drug finally arrived at Bod's coffee shop. Dwight wasted no time, instructing Tyson and Bod to sell it at the music festival. The two got to work quickly, but things took a turn when a gang of local thugs showed up. Without warning, they jumped Tyson and Bod, beat them up and took all their stock.
Come on, man.
An hour later, Bod and Tyson made their way to Keller's club, where Dwight was. Furious after hearing what had happened, Dwight vowed to retaliate. He immediately contacted Armand, bringing him into the plan. Since Keller had already agreed to work with him, they now had a solid team to fight back. Meanwhile, Tyson's mother was tending to his injuries when his father, Mark, walked in. Seeing his son bruised up, he demanded to know who had done it. Tyson explained the whole situation, but reassured his father that Dwight would take care of it. That night, Dwight and Keller gathered their crew, ready to go after the gang. Just as they were about to leave, Mark showed up. To everyone's surprise, he wanted in.
What? Ain't a boy anymore, he's a man.
Is that where you're off to now? Take care of things? Then I'm coming too.
He wanted a piece of the people who had hurt his son. Dwight, more than happy to have him on board, welcomed him to the team. When they arrived at the gang's hideout, Dwight armed his men with baseball bats. Without hesitation, they stormed the place, launching a brutal attack. After a long fight, Dwight's team emerged victorious, reclaiming the stolen drugs and cash. Back at Keller's club, the crew divided the money evenly, even cutting Mark in on the profits. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until 2 days later. One of the beaten gang members went to the cops, reporting the attack. He provided them with a license plate number belonging to one of Dwight's men. Unfortunately, most of the local police were corrupt and worked closely with the gang, meaning they were more than willing to act on the complaint. Meanwhile, Tyson was driving alone, talking to his girlfriend on the phone, when suddenly he got pulled over. It turned out the license plate given to the cops was his. Before he could react, the officers arrested him and took him to the station. Once there, he tried calling Dwight for help, but his phone was off. As the night went on, one of the officers confiscated Tyson's phone and managed to unlock it. Scrolling through it, they found just what they needed, a way to track down Bod's location. The next day, Tyson walked free, but the cops weren't done with him yet. They were still planning to confiscate his phone. Meanwhile, Bodie had also been picked up by a different group of officers. As for Charles, he was at the hospital, sitting by his father's bedside after he had fallen into a coma. Feeling overwhelmed, Charles called Dwight and asked him to come to New York. Despite his anger toward Charles for setting him up in the past, Dwight decided to go out of respect for Pete. Meanwhile, over at his ranch, Armand was dealing with a different issue. One of his workers had heard that Armand and Dwight had stormed the Black Macadam gang's headquarters during a concert. Concerned, the worker warned Armand to steer clear of the gang, especially their ruthless leader, Waltrip, who had been running Tulsa for years. Hardly anyone dared to cross him, except Dwight and Armand a day before. Curious about what his employee had told him, Armand went home and looked up Waltrip online. Sure enough, everything checked out. The guy had a fearsome reputation, was practically untouchable by the law, and commanded a massive crew. This made Armand nervous. He worried that his wife and child might now be in danger. At the same time, Dwight had just arrived at the hospital in New York to see Pete. However, Vince wasn't exactly happy to see him, and the two nearly got into a fight. Luckily, Charles stepped in and dragged Dwight to Pete's room. Since Pete was fast asleep, Dwight decided to leave and return later. Meanwhile, Bodie, who had been arrested earlier, had now fallen into the hands of Waltrip. The gangster wasn't playing around. He threatened Bodie, demanding to know everything about Dwight and why he was in Tulsa. Terrified, Bodie spilled the truth. Dwight had been sent by Charles, a New York Mafia boss, to take over Tulsa and start collecting payments from local dealers. Hearing this, Waltrip made it clear that he would never allow that. He was the only one who controlled Tulsa. Having gotten what he needed, Waltrip ordered 2 corrupt cops on his payroll to drop Bodie back home. Back in New York, Dwight suddenly thought of his daughter, Tina, who still lived there. He decided to track down her address and pay her a visit. When he finally found her, she was busy selling flowers. But instead of a warm reunion, Tina gave him the cold shoulder and demanded to know why he was there. Dwight immediately apologized, knowing that she and her mother had been left to fend for themselves while he spent 25 years behind bars. He promised that he wouldn't make the same mistakes again if she gave him another chance. Tina then revealed that she didn't hate him. She was just traumatized. Years ago, one of Charles's men had harassed her, and from that moment, she wanted nothing to do with the mafia, including her own father. Furious, Dwight asked who was responsible and why she hadn't told him before. Tina said it was Nico, one of Charles's henchmen, and she never got the chance to tell Dwight because he was arrested the very next day. Everything suddenly made sense to Dwight. Charles had set him up and sent him to prison to keep the incident quiet. Raging with anger, Dwight stormed into Charles's headquarters to find Nico. When he got there, Nico was playing cards with Charles, Vince, and a few others. Without hesitation, Dwight launched a brutal attack, killing Nico right in front of everyone. Charles, realizing that they were no match for Dwight, didn't dare retaliate. Dwight then left without uttering a word. A few days later, Charles went to his father, Pete, complaining about Dwight killing Nico. But Pete, knowing what Nico had done, brushed it off. To him, it was justified. Charles, however, wouldn't let it go. He wanted Dwight gone for good. This angered Pete, who slapped Charles and reminded him that Dwight was his most loyal right-hand man, someone he considered a brother. He warned Charles not to go after Dwight unless he wanted to lose his father's respect. With no choice but to hold back his frustration, Charles kept quiet, bottling up his anger. Before heading back to Tulsa, Dwight visited Tina once more and told her that Nico had been dealt with. Tina, worried, asked why he would go that far, knowing it would only cause more trouble. Dwight simply said that he did it because he loved her and didn't care about the consequences, even if it meant being hunted by Charles. Hearing this, Tina finally softened, realizing just how much her father cared for her. After arriving back in Tulsa, Tyson picked Dwight up and filled him in on everything that had happened. He explained that both he and Bodie had been arrested because of their fight with the Black Macadam gang. Over the past 2 days, Tyson had also been trying to contact Dwight, but his number was disconnected. Dwight apologized, explaining that he had been using a new phone while in New York. Wanting to get to the bottom of things, Dwight had Tyson drive him to Keller's club. There, Dwight confronted Keller about the recent arrests. Keller confirmed that it was all Waltrip's doing. He had ordered the cops to take them in. He also revealed that Waltrip had kidnapped Bodie and interrogated him. Furious, Dwight told Keller to arrange a meeting with Waltrip. When they finally met, Dwight demanded to know why Waltrip had gone after his guys when it was his gang that had started the fight. Waltrip made it clear he didn't like others selling drugs in his territory. If Dwight wanted to operate in Tulsa, he had to answer to him. But Dwight wasn't the type to take orders from anyone except Pete. Tension rose quickly, and Waltrip eventually kicked Dwight out. Meanwhile, over at Tina's home, she was busy with chores when the phone rang. When she answered, a menacing voice threatened her and her family. Panicked, Tina immediately called Dwight, fearing that Charles was behind it. Dwight assured her that he would get to the bottom of it. He quickly reached out to one of Charles's men, Goody, and demanded to know who had made the threatening call. Goody claimed he had no idea, but promised to find out. Goody and Dwight had been close before Dwight went to prison, so Dwight also asked him to come to Tulsa for an important discussion. Goody agreed, but said he needed permission from either Charles or Pete first. Later, Goody approached Charles about it, but Charles refused, suspecting that Dwight was setting a trap. Pete, however, trusted Dwight and ordered Goody to go, knowing that Dwight wouldn't cause trouble unless provoked. Meanwhile, Dwight sat down with Keller, suggesting that he expand his club, with Dwight as an investor. But in the middle of their talk, an armed man burst in and opened fire. A shootout broke out, and Dwight and Keller managed to take the guy down. When they checked the body, they discovered he was a Black Macadam gang member, confirming that Waltrip had just escalated the conflict. Dwight knew war was coming. At the same time, Tina and her husband were outside a supermarket when disaster struck. While Tina was inside shopping, her husband was suddenly attacked and beaten badly. The culprit? None other than Charles, still burning with revenge over Nico's death. Back in Tulsa, Dwight and Keller discreetly disposed of the Black Macadam gang member's body, but before burying him, Dwight had his jacket sent to Waltrip as a warning. Hours later, at the gang's headquarters, one of Waltrip's female henchmen brought in a package. When Waltrip opened it and saw the jacket, he flew into a rage, vowing to crush Dwight with everything he had. Meanwhile, Tina was now at the hospital, shaken from the attack. Her husband was in bad shape and needed medical care. She called Dwight, who immediately urged her to move to Tulsa for safety. She agreed, but decided to wait until her husband recovered. As for Goody, he had finally arrived in Tulsa. Dwight wasted no time. He grilled him about who had ordered the attack on Tina's husband. Goody swore he had no idea, having been busy arranging his trip. But Dwight was already convinced. This was Charles's doing, and sooner or later, he would make him pay. After that, Dwight extended an invitation to Goody, asking him to be part of his crew. They had history together, and Dwight had specifically called him there because of that bond. But Goody wasn't quick to jump in. He said he'd take some time to think about it. Not long after, Goody reached out to Charles and gave him a heads up. Dwight was absolutely livid about the attack on his son-in-law. If Charles had anything to do with it, Goody suggested he should consider apologizing to avoid escalating things into a full-blown war. But Charles wasn't having any of it. He flat out refused, saying there was no way he'd ever apologize to Dwight. Later, Charles visited his father, Pete, while he was relaxing in the bath. He pretended he was there to help clean his dad's head, but then, out of nowhere, he shoved Pete underwater and didn't let go until he was lifeless. Charles had long resented his father for always siding with Dwight, and now, with Pete gone, he could finally take full control. Killing Pete meant Charles was free to do whatever he pleased, including getting rid of Dwight. The next day, a crowd gathered at Charles's house to pay their respects after Pete's sudden death. Something stood out. Charles had shaved his head bald. He went around telling people that his father had died of a heart attack, playing the grieving son. Meanwhile, back in Tulsa, Goody broke the news to Dwight. Dwight was genuinely upset since he'd always seen Pete as a brother. But he refused to attend the funeral, saying he wasn't ready to see Charles's face just yet. Goody said his goodbyes and left for the funeral. A few days later, Dwight and his crew were training new recruits. He had been ramping up his numbers, knowing that either Waltrip, the ruthless gang leader, or Charles, the New York Mafia boss, could strike at any time. Afterward, Dwight told Keller to recruit even more people, and Keller assured him he'd get it done fast. Meanwhile, Anna was in a meeting with her FBI colleagues, discussing how Waltrip had been running his criminal empire without facing any consequences. Most of the local police in Tulsa were in his pocket, so the FBI needed to act fast to take him down. Back at Charles's place, mourners were still coming and going, but he had other plans. He called a meeting with Pete's most loyal enforcers, including Goody. During the meeting, Charles made it clear he was now in charge. He fed them another lie, blaming Pete's supposed heart attack on the stress caused by Dwight. He wanted everyone on board with hunting Dwight down. But one of Pete's old guards spoke up, reminding Charles that Dwight wasn't just some random guy. He was sharp, dangerous, and had been like a brother to Pete. Charles lost his temper and choked the guy right then and there, making it crystal clear. He was the boss now, and anyone who didn't fall in line would regret it. On the other side of town, Keller introduced two new recruits to Dwight. They were ex-military, highly skilled in hand-to-hand combat and firearms. Dwight was impressed and welcomed them immediately. The next day, Anna and the FBI launched a raid on Waltrip's headquarters. Unfortunately, Waltrip was nowhere to be found, but they did manage to arrest several of his men and seize his laptop. From that laptop, Anna uncovered a massive list of illegal operations: arms smuggling, drug dealing, and human trafficking. One of Waltrip's corrupt cops tipped him off about the raid, and when he heard the news, Waltrip was livid. He vowed to take revenge on Anna. Meanwhile, Dwight received an unexpected call from Charles. To Dwight's surprise, Charles apologized for everything and suggested they rebuild their old bond. He even said he'd be coming to Tulsa soon and hoped they could meet. Dwight agreed, but what he didn't know was that Charles was setting a trap to get rid of him for good. However, Charles also had no clue that Dwight's influence had grown, and he practically controlled Tulsa now. That night, Anna visited Dwight, but before they could talk, Waltrip suddenly stormed in and opened fire. Anna was hit, and Waltrip managed to escape. Dwight, unharmed, rushed her to the hospital. The next morning, Dwight found himself being interrogated by the FBI. They suspected he had helped Waltrip take out Anna. Dwight insisted that was ridiculous. She was a close friend. But the agents weren't convinced and wanted to detain him. Luckily, Dwight's lawyer showed up just in time and argued his case. Eventually, Dwight was released. Later, Dwight went to visit Anna at the hospital. He told her he was going to put an end to Waltrip and his crew. But Anna warned him that Waltrip might have already skipped town with all his dirty money. She also revealed something big. She might be getting fired from the FBI. It turned out the agency had learned about her connection to Dwight, and strict rules forbade agents from having relationships with ex-convicts or mafia figures. Dwight reassured her that no matter what, he'd take care of her. After leaving the hospital, Dwight met up with Armand, who informed him that Charles was already on his way to Tulsa and would be arriving in the morning. Dwight ordered Armand to rally the crew to be ready for Charles's arrival. The next day, Charles, Vince, and Goody arrived in Tulsa. Charles assumed Dwight would greet him warmly, but instead, Dwight made it clear he had built his own empire and wanted nothing to do with Charles. He also warned him not to mess with his family. Then, Dwight extended an offer. Goody could join his crew if he wanted. After a moment's hesitation, Goody chose to side with Dwight. Furious, Charles realized he had walked straight into a trap. When he looked around, he saw Dwight's men surrounding the area, guns ready. With no better option, Charles and Vince backed off and left. Elsewhere, Waltrip gathered his remaining men and told them they needed to prepare for a final attack on Dwight. One of his own men doubted him, saying their numbers were too low. That was a mistake. Waltrip executed him on the spot. That night, Dwight and his crew met at Keller's nightclub. Dwight introduced Goody as the newest member and made one thing clear: loyalty was everything. If anyone betrayed them, they wouldn't live to regret it. Then, Dwight outlined their next move. Waltrip and his Black Macadam gang were the last threat. If they took them down, Dwight's crew would be the only power left in Tulsa. The next day, Dwight instructed Bod, his hacker, to break into Waltrip's laptop, which was now in FBI custody. Bod did it effortlessly, pulling out business records and even draining Waltrip's bank account. Millions gone in seconds. When Waltrip realized his money had vanished, he lost his mind. Meanwhile, Anna, still in the hospital, received a letter from Dwight. Inside was a note telling her to check her bank account. When she did, she was stunned. Dwight had sent her $1 million. It was part of the stolen funds from Waltrip, a safety net since she was about to lose her job. That night, Dwight's crew was at Keller's nightclub when they heard motorcycles approaching. Waltrip and his gang had come for war. Dwight gave the order, and the fight broke out. It was brutal, but in the end, Dwight's crew wiped out Waltrip and his men. Dwight was now the undisputed mafia king of Tulsa. A few days later, Dwight was spending time with his granddaughter at Armin's racecourse. Tina and her family had officially moved to Tulsa, and for the first time in years, she called him Dad. That night, Dwight and his crew celebrated their victory at Keller's newly renovated nightclub. Everything seemed perfect until he got word that someone was waiting for him outside. It was Anna, but before he could say much, police and FBI agents swarmed in and arrested him. Turns out, Anna had betrayed him to keep her job. As Dwight was led into a police car, he smirked at her and said, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning."